Welcome to the National Museum of the United States Navy. This is David Barker. I'm one of the educators here. I'm going to introduce Lieutenant William Xu, who is a first-generation immigrant from China. He settled in New York with his mother at the age of 9. He went on to pursue engineering in Rochester, New York, followed by a law degree at American University here in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the Navy, Lieutenant Xu worked for the international law issues in the American Red Cross and served as the public defender in Brooklyn, New York. In 2018, he earned his direct commission in the U.S. Navy as the Judge Advocate General's, or JAG Corps. He attended Officer Development School at the Navy Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island, before reporting for his first tour of duty in San Diego, California. While in San Diego, he served as Staff Judge Advocate General for Submarine Squadron 11 and supported deploying sailors while underway in the USS Theodore Roosevelt. In 2021, Lieutenant Xu reported Bahrain for his second tour of duty as the branch head of the Criminal Defense Service in Bahrain. His office provides legal services for sailors, Marines, and Coast Guard men across the entire peninsula.
All right. Lieutenant Xu, thank you very much for joining us. This is David Barker at the National Museum U.S. Navy. I'm one of the educators here. And the big reason for our discussion is the Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And if you could tell us just a small detail about your complex nature of being an Asian American Pacific Islander with being in the Navy.
Of course, Mr. Barker, and thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'm Chinese American and I'm a first-generation immigrant. I moved to New York when I was 9 with my mother, settled down there. And I've always wanted to kind of give back to my quote unquote adopted country. And so it's a great privilege for me to be able to serve in the Navy, to be able to come to this country, which accepted me, provided me education, and then to be able to go to law, to get my undergraduate degree, to go to law school, and eventually join the Judge Advocate General's Corps in the U.S. Navy. I'm actually currently serving in Bahrain in the Middle East. And so I just think it's such a special privilege and a unique circumstance. I mean, being Chinese American, posted in Bahrain, working with all these international partners to ensure peace and prosperity in the region.
Excellent. Now, being someone from Chinese descent, would you say that you had a different upbringing than somebody who was born in the States from Asian American Pacific Islander?
That's an interesting question. I definitely think so. I truly believe that I think the U.S. by its nature is a nation of immigrants, and we all, many of us, bring these interesting perspectives from our native country. So having grown up in China, I think I have that unique perspective of what it's like being brought up abroad in a completely different culture, and then coming here into a different culture, a different environment, yeah. So, Mr. Barker, I do think that is different to be born in a different country than to be born in the United States, even though someone who was born in the United States is still ethnically Chinese. I really like the term that there are Americans born all over the world, because I do think that different background, that different experience of having grown up in another country definitely contributes to the diversity of not just race, but perspectives in our nation. And having now serving in our armed forces, I'm able to bring that unique perspective, that cultural perspective, to whatever we do to tackle the sort of the modern day problems we face, whether it's knowing a different language as my mother tongue and being able to tackle problems because of that, or a unique cultural competence that it allows me to have when we talk about issues that we have today, especially as it relates to Indo-Pacific.
Now, speaking of things that are happening today in the news lately, there have been a number of events happening against Asian American Pacific Islanders. Do you think that that is a large cause of concern for people, say, in the Navy or for just being Asian American Pacific Islander alone? And do you think there's anything that we could say to the populace at large why we shouldn't hear people of other cultures?
I think it's definitely a great concern. I really appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Barker. And in a way, for us who just look back at American history, it's a little bit of history repeating themselves. I think at one point and another, there have always been threats to our American way of life. And I think it's really easy to blame it on one specific community whom we otherwise would call Americans, whom we otherwise would call brothers and sisters. It happened for Asian Americans back in World War II when we interned Japanese Americans on a large scale that did not occur to Germans or Italians, even though they were also in the Axis powers. And I think in a way it's happening again today. And it's really concerning because I think we as Americans, we as a nation of so many diverse peoples, can easily give into fear and allow that to divide us. But I think it's really important to remember that no matter what your skin color is, especially if you're not born here, those Americans, American of Asian descent, we chose to be here. I chose to join the Navy. I chose to immigrate here and to be an American. And they no matter who you are, no matter what skin color you are, you contribute greatly to this country. I think that's really important to remember, especially in times of great threat to our American way of life. It's important to not focus on one particular a community and blame it on them when the underlying issues are different. So I think that would be my message. I think one of my favorite facts about World War II, and when we look back in history and just talk about sort of discrimination against Asian Americans, is that even while we interned Japanese Americans in World War II, one of the most decorated units of all time in military history was an all Japanese American regiment that fought in Italy. So while their families were interned, in the deserts of California, they were dying and risking their lives, and was the most highly recommended, highly decorated unit that fought in Italy and that fought in the entire war. And so that just kind of goes to show that patriotism is not defined by your skin color. It's defined by a set of ideals. And, I think Asian Americans back then, during the Japanese internment, Asian Americans today, like myself, we are just as patriotic as anyone else. And I think we need to recognize that discrimination like this can always happen, and we need to stand up for each other, whether it's, whether you're Latino or Black or Asian or any other ethnicity.
Those are really great points. I know with your Chinese heritage, you might not know some of the, shall we say, the Filipino situation with the Navy, because at one point the Filipinos had different status in America because they were not full citizens at one point, and they had a difference. They worked in the lower parts of the ship. They were the cooks or the mechanics. Do you know anything about that, or could you speak to other histories besides World War II, like maybe when the Chinese Americans or the Chinese who wanted to be Americans came here to help build the railroads?
Yeah, and so I know that the history of Asian Americans is very much tied to the building of this country. Period. We've served as far back, as a Civil War. There were Chinese Americans serving in the war since the founding of the United States. As you said, Mr. Barker, the Chinese Americans came over in droves as cheap labor to build the transcontinental railroad and to do some of the most risky, risky jobs, like placing dynamite, blowing it up, along with other immigrants like Irish Americans. And so they're very much, I think, part of the fabric of building America. I think the Filipino American aspect is so unique and interesting as well. So Filipino Americans have a significant presence in the U.S. Navy. I know that one of the facts that I learned while I was in the Navy that I didn't know was that the Navy and the military at large actually recruits directly from foreign countries. And so when we had a base in the Philippines, local Filipinos were allowed to enlist in the U.S. Navy and serve in the U.S. Navy, right? I mean, imagine that, another national from another country, never stepping foot in the U.S., joining and risking their life for the U.S. Navy. And of course, they were limited at what they could do, as you said. They could only do certain jobs on the ship and in the Navy. And they were never, I think in the beginning, they were not allowed to become U.S. citizens. But that thankfully changed, and many of them went on to have full and fulfilling careers, even commissioning as officers in the U.S. Navy and contributing and sacrificing just as much as those standing shoulder to shoulder with them. So I think that history is absolutely there, and I'm really appreciative of you and the museum in trying to tell more of it, of how Asian Americans have sort of helped shape and build this country.
Okay. Now, you had stated earlier that you are a lawyer, that you work for the JAG. I might have missed it, but did you get that training through the Navy, or was that training that you got before you joined the Navy? And how was it that you were able to become a JAG in the Navy through that training?
Yes, sir. So I became a lawyer before I joined the Navy. I went to law school in 2011 at American University in Washington, D.C., actually, where you are. And I practiced for a few years in the civilian world. I worked for the American Red Cross, and then I was a public defender in Brooklyn. And I had always had that itch, and I wanted to serve. And I just put an application package in for a direct commission into the JAG Corps. And they accepted me, and kind of the rest is history.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you very much, not only for your service, but for joining us in our Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And sir, may I please wish you the best ever in your career, and thank you very much for serving.
Thank you so much, Mr. Barker.
Do you have anything else you would like to share?
I don't think so.